Hello, anybody there?
Hey, Ken. Daniel Cook is here.
Hey, Daniel. How are you?
How about you?
I'm doing well. See, Lee's joining, Alex, Kareem, Chris. Big Chuck. How you doing, Lee?
Hey, good. Hopefully it was hauling a container.
The container truck.
Will I see you at DockerCon next week?
You are not. I'm grounded for now.
Yeah.
The last time I suggested going on a trip, my wife didn't talk to me for 3 days, so I kind of took that as a hint of not going anywhere for a little while. She's like, "You joined MasterCard to stop traveling. Why have you been gone all this weeks?" I'm like, "I don't know. It's work. What am I supposed to do?"
That's right. Yeah.
But I will be in your neck of the woods at the end of the year.
Nice. Okay. Good. It's kind of weird, actually. I haven't seen you for a while.
Yeah, it's been a while.
Yeah, this is cool. Last time was in Austin, I think.
I think it was. I know I just got a team in India, so I know I'm going to Pune in probably the next month, and then we're doing some stuff with AliCloud, so I'll be in China probably in the next month or two.
We're wrapping up to do something there as well, but I just wasn't convinced that. Yeah, there's a lot of rigmarole around doing business in China.
Yeah.
Okay.
Hi, everyone.
Hey. So it's about 5 apps. I'm gonna go ahead and get started. I think most everyone that I expected to be on is on. I know Doug had a conflict today and is not going to be able to make it. And Mike Peak also had a conflict. I wasn't sure if he was going to be able to make it. So there's sort of a couple of things on the agenda I want to talk through. The first one is just in terms of the review of the current work product of our group. So I think last week we said we'd have about 3 weeks that we're just going to leave the document out there for you guys to review it and to look at it. We accepted the proposed changes that Sarah made. We removed the word absolutely, and Chris from Amazon, who I think is on, was okay with that, with us removing that word, and then we added usually per your suggestion. And so I think we feel like we're at the point where we're kind of in final review. We're presenting to the CNCF, and Chris, I see you're on. I think you told me November, the second week in November, right?
Yeah, you'll be set for November 7th, I believe. Let me just double check. Okay. Yeah, you're good.
We basically have till the end of this month to sort of finalize the documentation, and then I'll share with you guys I'll start working on a presentation, and I'll put it out in the now that I have access to Google Documents again at MasterCard, I can post that out in Google, and you guys can put comments on it. So
nice.
This will be the second presentation to the TOC, and so I'm going to try to focus. They've had Chris Anzik sent out a reminder to them probably a month ago now, after one of the TOC meetings we were on, I sent out a request for them to look at it probably a month before that, and so they've had a couple months to take a look at what we've been working on, and so I don't think there's anything new in what we present them other than what our next steps are, and so we'll probably as we're finishing up the documentation aspect, we'll probably discuss next steps at our next meeting when Doug's on and Mark's able to make it. We'll talk through what do we want to propose to the TOC as what we want to do as our next steps with the work group.
Yeah.
So are there any comments, concerns, questions about the I guess the plan for the next 3 weeks?
So Dan Cohn had mentioned that there was going to be a professional copywriter or editor working on it. Do we know when that's going to fit in?
Yeah, so he's already started kind of looking at it. I think he joined the call, but we're it's, I don't know if I see him. He didn't join the call today, but we have somebody who is working on that, and I'll have an update on that probably in another week or two. The initial thought was it's too large for a white paper, but we are kind of trying to explain that we set it up to be a bunch of individual components and sections, so it's not really meant to be one big, large, gigantic. I think it's like 48 pages or something right now, document. So, we'll work through some of those things with the writer. Probably wait till after the TOC meeting because I don't want to. I don't know if I want to do much with it before we kind of talk to the TOC about what our next steps are. I feel like it'd just be a wasted effort, or it could be a wasted effort, not an effort that we would want to spend cleaning up something that the TOC doesn't want us to clean up, right?
Right.
So Ken, this is Kathy. When are you going to develop the slides?
Yeah, that's a good question, Kathy. I was probably going to use our next meeting to kind of talk through a rough draft of the slides, and mostly with the focus on what do we want to ask, what's our ask back to the TOC. And so I would say the first draft will be sent out before our meeting, which are we on a weekly cadence now? Or are we going back to bi-weekly? Do you guys know?
We're weekly right now.
We're weekly now? Okay, so I guess it'll be next week.
Okay.
Assuming that Doug can make it, so I'll check with Doug. As long as Doug's able to make it, we'll make it part of the next week's agenda. If Doug's not able to make it, we'll put it to the 2 weeks out.
Yeah, let us know if you need any help on the writing the slides.
Yeah, I'll share. I'll basically create it in Google Slides and share it with the work group, so you guys will have access to kind of help create whatever content you want to add into it.
Okay.
Yeah, I can send you a PowerPoint with the raw material I use for the images. If you want to change them.
That would be great. All right, thanks.
I can also send you some slides on the function graph.
Sure.
Okay.
Ken, this is Arun. So one thing I wanted to clarify, actually, Chris Munns never agreed to the term it's okay to use usually instead of absolutely. Our position is still that we would like to see the word absolutely over there. Just wanted to kind of clarify that.
Okay. Why didn't I see Chris is joining now? So,
Hey everyone, I'm really sorry I was caught.
Can you just remind us of the sentence real quick, or share the screen? Because I feel this might be an important point.
Sure. If I can find it. Trying to search the document now to find it. So. thought you could search in this thing, but maybe not.
Do we want to spend a few minutes today also talking about the events and the next steps on that?
I think so. So Austin said he wasn't able to make it, by the way, if you guys haven't seen the Slack channel. So he dropped in an update. I think he was doing quite a bit of meeting this week in Serverless, at Serverless Conf. So looks like that was productive. Was there any
I still think we can talk about sort of in a high level about the different proposals. I don't want it to end up as, you know, the guy that makes the most phone calls sort of pushes a standard. I think there are some deficiencies in one versus the other, and we should talk about them. And potentially we can converge because they're not big. But I think it's something worth discussing and not necessarily saying, you know what, we talked to all the world and now we have a proposal and everyone agrees. Because I think people need to be aware of what are the downsides of one approach versus the other.
Yep, yeah, I agree.
Right, so I think I'm showing the right screen, maybe. You guys seeing the white paper?
Yeah.
Okay. So I think, was this the line that we were talking about here, or is there another line?
Yeah, that is the one. It was really the idle capacity question.
So this is one of the things that's going to create a monopoly for the cloud projects and rule out or write out any open source projects from the definition of serverless. And I think that's really a shame to allow that to happen.
Yeah. Yeah, and to that point,
are all the other serverless projects in full agreement with this? Because I can't imagine that they would be. And by that, I mean open source projects.
The other thing, Chris, I don't know what negative ramification the use of usually has instead of absolutely, but I think folks are expressing a negative ramification for the use of absolutely. So maybe you could.
Sorry, is that to me, Chris Munns or Chris A?
Munns.
Yeah, I mean, I think a couple meetings ago I had said drop the word absolutely and just have it say no cost when idle. I don't think we need that strong of a phrasing in there. The word usually seems kind of ambiguous though, and I don't know if I was reading this from like an executive point of view and I saw usually, that sounds like an interesting caveat where we'd probably want to have some sort of clarification. But happy to get rid of the word absolutely. Agree that it's very strong. You can remove that word, and I think the rest of this doesn't need much changing personally.
Yeah, I mean, no cost to idle is the same thing. Absolutely is just a strengthener. So this is the definition of the word serverless. Is that correct, or serverless FAS? You know, what are we creating a monopoly for here? Can you just show us?
Yeah, I think in general there is difference between serverless and fast. So serverless is something that you don't really need to care about the servers, but so this notion of cost is really a business model. Because, even Amazon, but 1 second. So even Amazon today, you get free amount of invocations, and tomorrow you may choose to give I don't know, like a monthly, X number of invocations for $20, and you want to go beyond that. So this association with the invocation and the cost is sort of derived from a business model, not necessarily from the fact that you're not managing servers.
There is that, and it's also
I don't think that's accurate.
It's an implementation detail. It's only an implementation detail, and there is a cost to idle, and it's hidden or absorbed. So I think when you come to use an open source framework, you deploy it, your ops team will deploy it, there's zero cost to the developer. Now, there is a capacity and there is over provisioning happening, just like with AWS, but we're looking at technology here, not a business model, not a billing model. And I think that's too deep because it rules out the other projects.
It really does. And we've been talking about this now for almost 2 months, right? And I think the thing is, if this paper was a fast paper, then it makes total sense to include everyone. But if you want to talk about serverless, there are benefits that extend just beyond the usage of the technology from a developer's perspective. Otherwise, you start being able to very directly compare this to any container framework or almost any PaaS that's out there. And then the word is almost meaningless, and you might as well just talk about PaaS or containers as a service type frameworks. So it just starts to become kind of a meaningless label. So from our perspective, we see no ability for you to separate talking about what serverless means without talking about that the end impact to the entirety of the customer using it, both operations and development, is that there's a drastic shift in how you think about it that is impacted by the business benefits. It's not just a hammer. There's a lot of other characteristics that go along with it. And so, I mean, again, I think what we've seen, what I've yet to see is anyone come up with a better example of this that gives you a thing that defines serverless, that isn't just defining FAS, that also includes backend as a service and even potentially database as a service type serverless layers. Again, that isn't just FAS. If this is going to be a FAS paper, then great, that fits everybody. But if you want to call this serverless, you have to speak to all of the benefits that everyone else who calls it serverless sees.
I don't agree. I feel like what we're trying to do is trademark the term serverless just for the cloud infrastructure providers. You do have all of these costs. You do have all of these provisioning. You do have cost at rest. It's just that you hide it. Now, if an ops team or an enterprise team, maybe Kathy, set up a data center and they gave their ops team, they gave the developers one of the open source projects, they would have serverless with all these attributes. The thing is, this needs to be more inclusive. And I think this is very dangerous to write out or be so monopolistic with it.
Alex, I don't necessarily think it's just cloud. I think it's an operation model. If someone goes and packages a FAS solution with a self-service portal and sort of sealed approach, think like Azure Stack as a hosted platform. If it's sealed and no one is sort of touching and tuning the knobs and know about the container's underlying architecture, then it is serverless even if it's on-prem. I think the difference is someone aware of the underlying technology when he's deploying the functions.
Right, and I think that's a more constructive definition than one that just merely describes what Lambda does today.
Right, so, and there is one point here again about the capacity. Most people today, they sell, for example, storage like Dropbox and others. They give you, for $20 you get 100 gig. And tomorrow, even Amazon may choose to, for $20 you're going to get 1,000 invocations. That actually violates this statement right now, because you're saying, let's assume I paid $20 for 1,000 invocation. I haven't used any. It still is, pretty valid serverless, model. I don't take care of infrastructure. I just sort of have a initial cap. Just like with cellular providers, I go to AT&T and I could pay a monthly bill, and I may not use a lot of phones.
So I'm curious how you guys define this differently than any organization for the last 10 or so years that has built up a sophisticated enough PaaS internally where the developers have no visibility to the underlying infrastructure. Because I could rattle off about 50 different large-scale enterprises that have built out effectively what you guys are defining that does not look like A, functions as a service, or B, like serverless from the complete operational benefit of it. So again, we're coming back to what people have called PaaS for a long time.
What's the differentiating? So what's the operational benefit?
Yeah, the operational benefit to what's defined here is that you don't have operations teams caring about servers.
Right.
That is a key business benefit.
I agree to that.
So what you're talking about, where people are running their own things on their own iron or even in other people's clouds or whatever, does not remove that benefit from an organization. And it's a thing that businesses spend billions of dollars a year across hundreds of people's of time to do. So it doesn't really change the game for that business.
Chris, I'm with you on that. Chris, I'm with you on that. I'm not entirely aligned with Alex on his definition. I'm saying all the things that you just mentioned, the operational aspects and all that, they don't necessarily to tie into how much you pay per month. Is it a cap, or is it per invocation, or do you get a freebie, 1,000 invocations, and then you're starting to pay? All those things are a business model related. The things that you talked about are operational.
Absolutely not. What you're talking about is a specific pricing model. When you talk about no cost for idle, that is not a pricing model. That is a tenet of all of the various services that we're discussing. Now, you guys can say that I'm representing Lambda, and that's fine. But if you look across the industry at things that really look like serverless, so the other functions as a service providers, things like with what FaunaDB does, things like what Auth0 does, no cost for idle is very much a foundational aspect of those platforms, of the space, of how customers come to consume those. So this isn't just, oh, $20 for blah, blah, blah invocations. That's a pointless point to make, because as it is, I'm not speaking anything here as to cost models or anything similar. Cost models like that is more of a business decision. What we're seeing here is a foundation.
It's clear that there's a cost to idle. The thing is, yes, but you have a business model, and you have a hosted business model that hides that. And with any of these projects, you could create the same thing. Whether that ends up in the vendor making a loss or the vendor making a profit is another thing. I think what we're really talking about is cloud-hosted serverless products, vendor serverless products versus something that is on-prem or the operator takes responsibility for. It's still serverless.
This is where we 100% disagree. So, I mean, Alex, you have a FAS. It's a wonderful FAS product, but it is a FAS. Operationally, it does very little to reduce the burden on a majority of people in an organization that have to care about scaling servers, securing servers, and managing servers. It does not remove that from their ability. So if we go up to a point just above here where we talk about there being no management of servers, it doesn't change the fact that there is someone inside company X that has to manage servers, take care of this. It's not really that much of a paradigm shift. Again, if you look at companies like...
You've just moved it to your operations team in AWS. That's the only thing. And if somebody did the same thing and they took one of these really popular open source projects and they made a hosted version of it, then guess what? Is that now serverless? You know, I think that we really got to struggle here, because the definition is someone else is looking after it. It can be any of the software in this document, as long as someone else is hosting it, that's now serverless. I think that's a real stretch.
So if you look at Facebook, Twitter, eBay, Google, internally at Amazon, outside of AWS, companies like Etsy in New York, Tumblr, any of the big organizations that have been internet facing for a long time, their developers have no concept of the servers that they run on. So again, what is the thing that you're defining that is different than all of that stuff? How are you defining something different than PaaS? Because again, from the developer's perspective, there isn't much of a change. If you can come up with a firmer definition that separates it from just generic FaaS, then wonderful. But I have yet to, in the 2 months that I've been part of this, see a way that someone comes up with a definition that is different than just what PaaS has been for almost a decade now. Serverless extends beyond just the developers, and it involves everyone in the organization and how they think about the underlying technology as a benefit to the business. To ignore that and say, oh, it's just what developers experience, again, doesn't differentiate there. It's just not what has happened in the industry.
Along with your argument then, if we take any serverless project on this paper and we host it ourselves and then give someone a sign-up page, that is serverless. And if it's not, then that's not serverless. Is that what you're saying? In which case we should say serverless is hosted FaaS. If you say that, I think we could agree with the definition.
That's what we were trying to say.
What you're qualifying, zero cost at rest, is just a pricing model, and it's just how much of a loss or profit the company is going to make. I don't think that is actually the definition. So if you want to say hosted FaaS and keep it lightweight around that, that makes more sense. But I also think serverless is a bigger term, similar to the term we use for cloud, right?
Alex, I think you need to go and read the document where it currently stands. So as just shown on the screen here, we have split up developer and provider as kind of two different types of personas that are involved here. And so yes, the provider does not see the benefits to this, whereas the end consumer does. So if you look at it again, like I think that's what everything you just said is basically in the doc, the way that it's defined right now.
And Chris, that's actually a point that there are two perspectives. And it may be that if we consider cost or pricing, or if we consider this paragraph from those two perspectives, it might be that we collectively settle on it a bit more easily. Because I think If you look at something if you look at cost from an end user's perspective, maybe there is no, or there shouldn't be any cost to idle time. If you look at cost from the vendor's perspective, there probably is cost to that idle time in terms of offering that service. And I wonder if that wouldn't help.
I'm all for clarifying language here, and I agree there could be more said about this. I'm thinking about the end consumer of this document and what they're going to walk away with from it. It seems to me that we agreed a while back that there's more than just FAS that makes up serverless, right? So if we're going to define all of those areas as part of this and have this be a future-looking open document, then the characteristics of what defines serverless, again, has to extend beyond just FAS. I'd also think it has to extend, again, just beyond the developer customer, because there is a lot more to a senior executive at an organization who's going to read this, who's not going to think, oh, this benefits half my company, but not the other half of my company. So I'm all for clarifying information here, but I think it's very different to remove the aspects around the fact that you don't pay for idle with serverless. That is de facto one of the things that you see every analyst and many blog posts and other people talking about it. There's absolutely a space for FAS that you host and run yourself. It just shouldn't be known as serverless FAS. It'd be self-hosted FAS.
So I
mean, if we
think
that
we need representation from all the projects on this paper, and I don't think we have that on this call. Even if you look at the webpage from Bitnami for Kubeless or the one for Fission, they both say serverless framework, serverless functions. And for us to take that away from them, I think we should at least get everyone to agree to consensus on that.
I would love to call Microsoft in the room too.
Paper and submit PRs to everyone's repo saying change your website because you can't use that term anymore. In effect, you're trademarking this or removing it from these projects.
But this is something that happens in the industry, Alex. You have people who have whitewashed terms for decades, right? DevOps, big data, cloud. These are terms that have been abused by everybody and anybody that wants to be part of an interesting trend. I mean, that's just going to happen. It doesn't mean that we shouldn't have a paper that represents what a lot of people think the industry is going in.
Yeah, I don't think a white paper, whatever this is, has to go into each product or each open source community and ask them to change their terms.
So Dan,
it's a good point that we should at least talk to them or bring it up to them.
Dan specifically told me that there are 3 or 4 projects. I think only one of them is on this call, who have a vested interest in proposing to be considered as incubator or inception projects by the CNCF. Those are the ones that I think he should at least ask to join, or I don't know why they're not here, and to actually to speak.
We've invited all of them, so there's
but it feels like this is the final like nail in the coffin for the term serverless for open source projects, and I don't know that that's a great idea.
I mean, I'd also expect this document to kind of be a living document and evolve over time. So, it's not going to be a nail in the coffin.
Well, this isn't going to come out once that's in there and accepted. That I think that's going to be it.
Alex, I have a question for you. Why do you care so much about applying this label versus just saying that you're fast technology?
That's not the question, is it? It's saying that that your technology is not serverless or has nothing to do with it. I think that's the issue here.
Sure, but if it came out and this document went and said, okay, this is what serverless is, now everyone sees this document and that's what serverless is, how big of a deal is it to say, you know what, you're right, we're just FAS, we're not serverless? How damaging is that really to the products that people have built that have their own benefits and use cases and so forth?
I think,
you won't get to invite it.
This is not particularly. Sorry, I wasn't invited to serverless conf. Did someone just say that?
No, I'm saying if there'll be a serverless conf, we can go and present. Joking, it's a joke. But I'm saying
you won't be able to present there, right?
We can't use the serverless hashtag anymore.
I think this technology is still early enough that I don't think we have to worry about putting any nails in any coffins. So, but we do want to try to use terminology that is accepted across a group of individuals. I don't think we're going to solve this specifically today in this call, but I think if we just maybe write out both perspectives as two different competing definitions today, I think that might solve some of the concerns. I mean, this is like just the introductory paragraph of the document. The meat isn't really in this part of the document, really. So I don't know. It seems like a lot of time being spent on the terminology, which is important. I'm not saying it's not important, but when you have two different sides going at it from two different directions, I don't know how much progress we're going to make on a phone call.
Yeah. And Ken, to your point, and back to my suggestion earlier is that you argue maybe we would do best to represent both perspectives in there, that of the vendor and that of the consumer, because we're trying to do that in a one fell, we're trying to capture both perspectives in one statement, and yeah.
Right. So yeah, so if whatever isn't being captured in this part, if you guys want to suggest that over the next week, we can, sort of try to close it off next week if that's acceptable to everyone. If that's not acceptable, then we can, after we talk with the TOC, we'll see if the TOC wants to even continue with the white paper in its current state or not. So.
Cool.
So all I did is I tried to, in that one paragraph that seemed to be a little bit contentious over the last couple of weeks. I think it's in here. I already passed it. I took out absolutely, since that seemed like a little bit of I just made it no cost to an idle, which is what I think Chris, you'd suggested would be all right. And then I took out usually down here, just so it wasn't questionable. What does it mean by usually? No cost, right? So.
I think the term usually is because I may choose to make a fixed cost per month, or I may not associate the invocation directly with the cost. Give you 100 invocations per month for free. So that's why the term is usually. I do agree on the fact that serverless is more of a hosted version versus FAS, and all the things about zero operation. But the term that I must be charging a certain pricing model seems to me pretty limiting.
Yeah, so I think we can work on this to kind of make it not about the pricing model and about more of the operational model.
Yep.
Yeah, I think the concept of no cost when idle, that's we should put there. But in terms of the, say absolutely, I also have some reservation, because, when you warm start, there are some resources there, right? And also I think in Amazon, right, the step functions, and there are some, resources there which are used, but you do not charge, right? So it's not absolutely, but I'm not sure whether usually is the best terminology to describe this or not.
Yeah.
I don't know if I'd say operational or business perspective or like consumer perspective.
Yeah.
I'm just trying to watch what you're typing there, Ken. So.
Yeah. Consumer probably is better.
So I'll go back to what Yaron said. So Yaron has a point, right? So there's this potential that you could have some sort of product angle or feature set that you do pay for that gives you some sort of other capability. And so it meets the operational demand of there being no server ops whatsoever. And so I think, Yaron, I think you're the one who had suggested the usually, right? And that's kind of what you were hinting at with the usually, was that there might be a feature component that person pays a benefit for that gives them some sort of additive capability. Is that correct?
Yes, I just didn't want it to make it so black and white. So if, even you guys as Amazon tomorrow say, we want to give you some monthly, you pay $10 and you get, I don't know what.
Yeah. So if we took the line where it says with the exception of stateful storage costs and then added something like or added capabilities or something like that where it's attached to that caveat around storage cost, does that help kind of align with what you're trying to add in there?
Yeah, or added the SLA or whatever, added functionality.
I wouldn't say necessarily SLA potentially, because then maybe that's like bucketing too much, but like some sort of additive like platform capability or feature set or something like that. Which in this case, you're considering an SLA one of those things, but it doesn't necessarily have to be just that as a potential space.
It's good for me. I don't know for the others.
Yeah, I'd like to hear others think about that. It does seem like one of the things that maybe adds some width to this definition in terms of that there could be something that you want to pay extra for. Otherwise, you're not paying any cost when idle.
Yeah, I think the biggest change here and the one that's the most helpful is setting the perspective. So from a consumer perspective, and the thing is like, it's not unimaginable that in the future, serverless providers wouldn't necessarily change their pricing model around when functions are not running, whether or not you've got them warm or they're very hot, or like some of this is subject to change as well. If the entire world was mostly using functions, you can bet there's going to be updates around how things are priced, and that may include
I think it would continue to lie around special features and capabilities. I think at least what we hear pretty universally is that people like the idea of not paying for idle. So for services that are less frequently accessed, for things that like we conflate or we tie together no idle with a lack of capacity planning need. So for you not having to pay for the peak capacity of your infrastructure as well. We hear pretty universally that that's what people are looking for, kind of across everything, whether it be the compute side, application scaffolding, database side. I don't see the industry moving away from that. And I think if you look at least what the other cloud providers are doing, everyone seems to be kind of agreeing in that space that the not paying for idle is one of the biggest key differentiators compared to how people have done IT planning for the last 20 years. So I have a pretty strong gut feeling that that's not going to go anywhere anytime soon. I can see certain feature sets or capabilities being a pay for additive over time.
Great. Well, I think I feel like we've accomplished a huge, a huge thing at this moment. So.
Look, I've reached out to some of the other projects. It'll be interesting to actually get them to make a comment on this.
Yeah, it'd be great to get their input, Alex.
I see it with this point because they still brand themselves and identify serverless, but it seems like there's right.
And then I think what we'd like to do, Alex, is have them provide some, like a paragraph that kind of describes where they feel like they differentiate from what we have in here, and we'll just add that in and try to say that there's one view, and then we can talk about that next week if that makes sense to have that view in here or not, or if it modifies or changes any of the thoughts we have so far.
I mean, I'd like to see text submitted that explains how points 1 and 2 don't define serverless, right? Like I want to hear what the story is that makes it different than, again, what PaaS has been for many large organizations for a very long time, and what kind of the key differentiator is to define this as serverless. Otherwise, it's just rebranding of something that's existed.
Yeah, I think that's a fair ask. And what we want to do is capture not only how it differentiates in those areas, but more importantly, how it's defined today in the industry, because over time, I think that will change. To the point Chris made earlier. So, Cool. And then I think the only other topic I had on the agenda was to talk about, there was some discussion, I guess, at the last meeting I couldn't make around defining a specification. And I think we should hold off on any kind of specifications until after we talk to the TOC. That'll be one of the items I want to bring up with them. Is if they want to see us create some kind of a specification. Specification might be too hard of a word, but more of like a, what's the current state of the specification today?
I think collecting them as we're currently doing is probably a good idea and can be done in parallel.
Right.
I think we can start breaking small, specification. Let's not call them specification, but the events is one, and maybe I've seen some of the challenges talked about in serverless conf is all the sort of debugging and instrumentation in serverless. So maybe we can come up with some approaches to do that. So we can go point by point and creating those mini specifications or even reference implementations of something.
I think reference implementation is what I was thinking of. I couldn't think of the word, but that's exactly what I was thinking was reference.
I think in this paper, right, we have listed some, something which we, can write about on the, at the end of the next step.
Yeah, I think so too.
Okay. Actually, there's an issue, in the open source. Yeah, just a sidetrack. In the open source link, it does not work. Ken, would you like to scroll down to the last session? Yeah. I just want to make sure that's not my own problem. When I click that link, it does not work. The comparison of the open source projects.
Where's that at? Let's see.
It's in the conclusion. I think it's in the conclusion there. Yeah. Yeah, here, this open source. Yeah, here. Open source serverless. Somehow this link does not work.
Okay.
I'm not sure whether other people have the problem. Maybe you can check. Yeah.
I lost my mouse. Oh, here it goes. Okay. Got too many screens. Yeah, it's not working. We'll fix that.
Okay. Thanks. Yeah.
Maybe we can add here to the next step what I mentioned about instrumentation or debuggability or things like that.
Yeah. Actually, this section lists the next step. Like events, functions, function graphs, and there are some other things. When we scroll down.
Oops, sorry. We got events, functions. Is there another one?
I think there's some
and we want to add events, functions, function workflows.
Yeah, maybe, I think something around instrumentation and debuggability could be, a common interest for everyone to address. I don't know, many of you were in the conference, so did you have anything that stood out that sort of is missing or calls out?
God, for spell check.
So for the events, I think, that includes the event metadata, right? The metadata.
Yeah.
Okay.
And in the events, in what I wrote, I made it clear that there are actually two different things. One is sort of the message, and the other one is the API. And they don't necessarily have to be the same. There are also some services where there is no message because those are platform services that just, like S3 generates an event. You're not triggering the event through a message. It's a platform service that generates an event and sort of has its own closed schema that you cannot influence externally. So we need to distinguish between those two elements.
I'll clean that up later, but just kind of capturing the metadata idea.
Yeah.
Great.
Okay.
Well, thank you guys for your time today. Hopefully,
maybe you can spend just a couple of minutes on the points on the events that I wanted to clarify. You know, there are the two proposals, essentially Austin and the one that I came with. I think on the metadata, types of metadata, we're mostly aligned. You know, just bits. I think the key difference, which is also what Mark was digging into, is that the way we see that the message body needs to be the transport body, and then if you want to add more stuff, you add it through the headers. And that means that you could have, you know, I could have a protobuf or something like that running efficiently. And the way that the open events thing work is that you have two layers of serialization, because the message is being serialized as another JSON object within the origin, you know, within the envelope JSON object. So that may be a very nice thing for low fidelity, low frequency type of events. But probably if you're doing stream processing, that's not something you would consider. So one way is to say, we'll choose one or the other. The other way is say, you know what, maybe you want to do double serialization and all that. You go with this packaging format for the event. You want something more efficient, you go with the other approach.
I think I'd almost suggest we sort of outline both approaches and the pros and cons of them, versus trying to pick one.
Yeah, I think for that we need another one moment, several sessions to discuss, you know, those in detail. Probably not in this call, but yeah, if you know can list, you know, pros and cons, that will be helpful.
Yeah, I did list in the last paragraph in what I posted, especially the one with that wasn't merged yet, and the differences. So instead of reading everything, you could just look at, you know, a few sentences.
Okay.
So is that in the link? Where is that? Where can we find that, Yaron?
So first, it's in GitHub, but I merged a couple of hours ago a few more comments, and Doug still didn't merge it. You could see that also in the Slack, but in the / proposals in the working group.
Okay, I got it open.
Yeah, this is where I listed the two forms of events, or platform events, for lack of a better name, and sort of external events, which have to be sort of transferred somehow in certain protocols. And then it sort of lists the two things, the event message and protocol. A protocol is not something new. It's existing protocols that you basically lay those messages on. And the second one is an example of an API, and I gave there a JSON, a Golang, you know, interface example. This essentially parses it. Now everything here is open for changes. It just sort of puts a strawman. There's also other two considerations that needs to be met. I didn't list a solution, but one is, how do you address micro batching? Because in many cases you'll send one event at a time, but the function may want to consume multiple events in a single invocation, and other things. And there, at the end, you have the sort of the differences. As I alluded to, the main difference is this notion of double serialization. because the fields, the metadata fields, is something we can all just agree on, and they're roughly the same, maybe just slightly different names.
Yaron, what's the expectation with this? Is the expectation that any project that is FAS or open or serverless would implement this protocol?
So the nice thing about it is that actually, if you just do an HTTP post, it complies with it. You don't need to do anything. So it's only the so from the function perspective, maybe existing functions don't necessarily comply to the API. You can create a stream layer that translates the message into a common API, very lightweight, and project can decide over time to adopt this, this thing of describing some schema to the event.
So who's coming up with this and deciding how complex it should be and what's the right schema and what people are using, whether it suits existing users?
Yeah, but if you go through it, you'll see that there's not too many definitions. It's essentially just the few headers give you things like that are exist in every serverless, like an ID, timestamp, and a few other fields you could see out there, and most of them are optional. Besides, there's only two which are not optional. One is the ID, because every event has to have some sort of an ID, for logging and for many other purposes. And the other one is sort of the class of the event, sort of the type of the event. Everything else is sort of flexible and optional.
Yeah, that wasn't the question. Who's putting this spec together? Is it just yourself, or are there meetings? How is this being? How are you deciding what's put in this?
I just wrote it, a couple of days ago for a couple of hours, and the intention is that we all discuss. It's sort of for discussion, but we can all agree that this is something we adopt.
How does this differ from what Austin was proposing?
So I listed those differences in this last paragraph, okay? I think Austin is taking it from a product that they have, which is essentially an HTTP message router, okay? It doesn't fit streaming, it doesn't fit many other use cases. It doesn't fit cases where, let's assume I'm streaming a database records from Postgres and they come in a native format of Postgres. I'm probably not gonna marshal them the way Austin suggested in his document. So it's very good for webhooks and those kind of things. It's not a generic solution that fits backend applications. So I think that's the main difference. They essentially translate everything to a JSON document where you have a wrapper JSON and you have an internal JSON, and I think it's limiting the applications.
So with Austin's example, in his message in Slack, he said that he had Amazon, Google, Microsoft, Oracle, and IBM are all in agreement with his specification. Now, I don't know if that was an exaggeration, but if he's got that much backing, maybe we should also look at what he's doing.
No, again,
if that's going to be your standard.
That's right, but I think we should also look at technical merits, not just of sort of marketing campaigns. Okay, I think if we go and present to everyone that's involved, and we could say, look, you're going to pay a huge performance penalty every time you're going to demarshal an event. Is that okay for you? So maybe it's good for Firebase, but I don't know if it's good for stream processing and other new applications that are going into serverless. And I think the open events sort of starting point is in those type of applications that are low frequency, low fidelity. So we can say, okay, we're going to have two standards. One is for sort of backend applications, which does think about those kind of resource utilization issues. And we could have one for frontend. Or we can have one that's, because there are two different things in the specs. One is the metadata fields, like the timestamp, etc. Both specs have roughly the same, and we can agree that we call them the same names and they're exactly the same, okay? The big difference that needs to be bridged here is, do we want this huge overhead of double serialization and hard coding fields versus incrementally adding? I'll give you an example. When you have an HTTP gateway, it basically adds more metadata into the event. So if you store everything in JSON and you need to basically decapsulate JSON, insert more fields like the origin of the, you're not necessarily getting the ID of the event in the event itself. It may be embedded through the gateway or other mechanism. So there are limitations in that proposal. So you can say, okay, there are a bunch of guys agreeing to it, so let's overlook the implementation, the challenges. I'm saying let's look at the challenges, and maybe we can come to a converged approach that everyone is happy with.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just concerned that we'll get a standard called cloud events that everyone has to start implementing, and nobody's agreed to it. Like, have you spoken to the other serverless projects that are part of the group?
But it's actually the other way around, because the way that what I wrote works is that existing things actually are already standard. Because the way the messages are structured, I don't need to form any special message.
Yeah, I mean, let me know if you have any meetings with the other projects about this, because it would be good to speak to them and see if they, if they're willing to do the hours to implement this, to have that consistent.
There's nothing to implement. I think you haven't sort of. Let's take it offline, and we'll spend a few minutes and explain that. It's actually sort of reverse engineering the existing, model.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
Sorry, just real quick on this. The only involvement that I've known about it is passing conversations with Austin from Serverless Framework at ServerlessConf, and then some of the conversations here. As far as I know, we haven't committed to any spec, reviewed any spec, put feedback in on any spec. We generally like the idea of there being kind of like an industry spec that can act as a glue that allows many different providers of like event sourcing to plug into various fast solutions. But that's about as far as the conversation goes, as far as I know.
Yeah, and I think what I'll do is I'll set up a separate call from this for those of you interested in this discussion, and try and get Austin, make sure Austin's available to join. So.
Yeah, I think I agree with Chris. I think it's too early to say, we have some spec or standard. I think people need to start to read this and then add, our input or comments. I think we still need quite some time to find.
And we can decide to have two different message formats for the same thing. One which is operating for one use case and the one which operates for a different use case, assuming they have the same metadata in them.
If I could run this real quick, the thing that I think will happen is that we can come up with an idea of a common spec, and then everyone can say, oh, we support the common spec. But then people could still support what else they support. So like example, like the 20 plus other teams at AWS that integrate with Lambda, we would never be like, oh, now you must adhere to this spec. But I think in general, we could be like, oh, a given product is open spec compliant, fantastic. I don't think it implies that there needs to be any sort of forced action to make everyone meet that. Like, I don't see this becoming the HTTP of, event sourcing, as it were.
Yeah, and Chris, in what I wrote, every Lambda implementation can fit into that, the way that it's defined, and maybe with a small API wrapper that just analyze the message and figure out if it's Kinesis or S3 or something and generate sort of a class definition out of it. Because right now you don't have, if I'm getting S3 or Kinesis or HTTP, API gateway message, I can't decipher that from the function itself. There's no schema or like event type. So that's the only thing that's sort of required, is to decipher that and generate another metadata thing that says this is a Kinesis event.
Yeah, that's fair. And I think, like as Kathy was saying, something we're just like really early in this conversation. So I don't know. It doesn't seem to me like it makes a lot of sense spending more time on it today, and we're out of time. But yeah, I think there's a lot of room for a lot of things to happen. But I've literally had about 4 sentences worth of conversation about it. So I don't know if the other, like if the Microsoft and Googles of the world have had deeper conversations, but I'll just give you the viewpoint of where we are with that.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Cool. Drop. Take care, everyone.
Take care, everyone. Have a great afternoon or a great morning for those of you on the West Coast. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.